Lisa Ward, and I'm on today's episode of Momentum. And today I have a great guest here with me, and his name is Matt Dworkin, and we're in Peachtree Corners on the Peachtree Corners Network. So Matt, I want to talk to you a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm a corporate trainer by practice, so I train folks on how to handle anything ranging from technical support, customer service, customer satisfaction, that sort of thing.
Okay, well that's great. Now, how long have you been here in the area in Peachtree Corners?
We've been here about 5 years.
Okay, 5 years. All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about social media. Social media as it relates to government entities and public officials. So do you think that they should be using social media in today's world to communicate with their constituents and the public in general?
I think in a very limited sense, it's a very good idea. What I really like about how Peachtree Corners does it is that I know that they're monitoring social media and they are broadcasting out information, but they're not engaging in dialogue. And I think that that's actually probably a smart thing, because one of the maxims that I like to train people on is whenever you argue on the internet, you always lose. But what I really like is how I always know what's going on in the city, thanks to social media and sort of that presence.
Okay. Well, you kind of almost stole my thunder and took one of my questions a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and rework that for you. But there's so many channels with regards to social media. And when you think about things in the context of government and officials and politicians and all that sort of thing, are there any particular channels that you think are better or are not so good for them to be able to communicate?
I think the best one that we have locally is Nextdoor, because one of the things that makes it great is that you have to actually certify that you live in the neighborhood to have access to Nextdoor. So you're always engaging in conversation with your neighbors and not sort of outside trolls or people who are trying to sway your opinion who don't live in your neighborhood. And I know people that use it for anything from trying to sell things and sort of like as a mini Craigslist, to using it as an avenue to sort of question the officials, but also to sort of bring up and get other people's feedback. And it's always good to see what other people think. And I think Nextdoor's a great platform for that, because you can have those threaded conversations. Unlike something like a Twitter, where you can sort of tweet something out, but it's sort of hard to follow an actual dialogue in Twitter.
And that's wonderful from a local perspective, and we know that there's some really amazing things happening here in Peachtree Corners. But as we continue to think about, the government as a whole, there are a lot of different entities, there are a lot of different branches of that. So Nextdoor seems like it's something that's going to be great for the local level. But what are your thoughts around a broader level with regards to politicians? Because certainly those people on a broader level also impact us here on a local level as well.
Sure. I think it depends upon how responsibly they're using it. When you're using it to sort of engage with individual people, as some of our politicians have been doing recently, and almost taking it to the level of bullying, that's not productive for anything. And these should be well thought out and reasoned statements on the part of our politicians, not sort of angry tweets at 3 a.m.
Okay, so now thinking a little further about that, there may be some politicians that say, hey, I like social media, I like all the various channels of social media, because I feel that's more of a path to kind of get directly to my people. Do you agree that it's a more direct path, or do you think that there are some consequences with that?
I think it's a great way to get the message out without being filtered. But again, it sort of relies upon who the voice is. There are some people who are very good at speaking for themselves and speaking without a filter, or are taking the time to make good, articulate arguments. And there are some people who aren't. And I feel like the people who aren't, they're sort of hurting themselves, because you take a look, one thing about the internet is nothing is ever gone once it's on the internet. So you look at cases where you have people who are running for office now, and people are digging up their tweets from 2011, 2012, but their statements are still alive today, and that may reflect upon who they are as a person and may impact people, when it comes to voting in November.
And that's a really good point as you're thinking about, looking back with regards to social media. But let's talk about going forward. What do you think is, how can people continue to use this going forward? What about the trends? Do you think things are going to be different as far as how politicians and government entities continue to utilize social media?
I think it's going to be very important, because it's a way to kind of energize people. If you can generate interest in a hashtag, you can start a movement and you can track and you can see how much attention and focus that entire movement got based solely upon tracking just that hashtag. And I think for those that are using it wisely, it can be a devastating tool for their benefit or potentially to the benefit of their political enemies.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that does really make a big difference, because when we think about things like all the money that it takes to run a campaign and being more cost effective, that does make a lot of sense from a kind of a cost or financial perspective there. So how do you think these social media campaigns impact elections directly?
I mean, I think they can have a huge impact. If you want to start looking back, I mean, even if you looking back to the President Obama's first campaign, they were very savvy in terms of how they were doing that, how they were getting word out, how they were getting people together to come to particular places and organize. And it sort of kept that grassroots feel to the organization, but it was still using that technology. And I think it's just going to keep going and expanding from that.
So if I'm hearing you right, I'm hearing you from more of the perspective of engagement with regards to the usage of social media. But what about just getting general information out there? What are your thoughts about, organizations that are on the state and local and federal level using those to be able to get that information just out there to people in general?
I mean, it's a great platform to do that. As a person, I am generally skeptical of a lot of the information I see on the internet, and I'm very careful about checking out the sources, because you can see a lot of information that goes around that may not be the most researched information. They talk about the meme and the power of the meme, and if you could summarize in one little square with a caption, a message, and get it out there, whether it's accurate or not, you can be very successful in changing the narrative based around that.
And you're right about that meme. Those memes are everywhere. In fact, they might be making a meme about us. So I have another question for you too. So thinking about, what you mentioned about how people are currently using social media, especially people that are, current politicians or people who are candidates. What are your thoughts about when these people are attacked online? What should they do? How should they deal with some of the negative energy that sometimes kind of comes at them via social media?
I've always been of the opinion that the only way to combat negative energy is positive energy. If you start engaging and you start arguing, sometimes in cases you're actually giving justification to the arguments, and sometimes it's better just to rise above it and not even dignify it with a response, depending upon the source.
As you mentioned before, that stuff stays there forever. That digital footprint is really something that people ought to think about when they're putting things out there. So I totally agree with you on that. Okay, so Matt, I have yet another question for you today, kind of this whole Q&A about the social media stuff. So as you think towards the upcoming elections, do you think that social media has any sort of impact where it could differentiate, whether a person's going to vote for this person or that person, or even when you think about yourself, how is that going to impact how you're voting for people on the state, local, national levels?
I feel like social media can be a great way to pass endorsements along and really get the word out. If you've got somebody who might have, 1 million followers, right? And they come out with a tweet that says, I'd like you to vote for this person. They just deliver their message to 1 million people.
I have one more question too. I keep saying that, don't I? So what do you think is the best way for people who want to be able to have some sort of engagement or interaction with those people at the state, local, and national level and these government entities to be able to get them to actually engage back with them and communicate with them? How should we as constituents approach these people on social media?
I think it just depends upon the individual. Like, some people respond better to Twitter, some people respond better to Facebook. Probably the social media savvy ones are going to be on all the platforms, all the major platforms, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all that. But there's going to be some who pick and choose, and just make sure that you know where they're active and just go after them there.
Now, some of these platforms are very static. Some of them are just rolling like Twitter. How important is it that we think about timing?
Yeah, I mean, I think Twitter is the most direct one. It goes out, it's a blast, it goes out right away. And yeah, you can have a Twitter conversation evolve over the span of like a half an hour, where when you start getting follows and retweets and all kinds of things, it can sort of take off from there and take on a life of its own, whereas Facebook tends to be a little more static. So you might see a comment, and then you might get a sort of a threaded conversation.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I've learned a lot from you with regards to what your thoughts are on social media and government entities and how they're actually using it and engaging with their constituents. So I really appreciate you coming out, and that's pretty much all we're going to talk about today, but I'd love to kind of pick this up offline. This is Elisa Word. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode of Momentum. We'll see you soon.